As soon as the music ended, Jack became nervous all of a sudden. There was a feeling that, if he wasn't the one that was chosen, he would surely kill someone here. But he managed to suppress this feeling. On the other hand, Benson did not wait for the lady in the middle of the dance floor to mention who her partner was going to be. He immediately got onto his feet and began heading towards the dance floor. His current expression was quite smug. He turned around and gazed at the group behind him. After giving them a contemptuous smile, he turned around and began walking again. Jack, on the other hand, looked at Ben's back with rage fuming inside his heart. His emotions were quite getting out of control. But at the end of it all, he managed to make himself to calm down. In his mind, he made himself believe that Benson was just bluffing them. Since the hostess had not yet mentioned the partner, he decided to keep calm and wait. But not long after that, his heart skipped a beat the moment that he saw the lady glancing towards their direction. Currently, Ben was directly in front of him. As she gazed towards him or Ben, Jack couldn't help but clench his fists tightly. They were currently seated some distance from the dance floor. As a result, it would take a few seconds for Ben to reach the floor. Anderson and the others were emotionally unstable due to the fact that their enemy was going to take the first dance on the floor of the banquet that had been held their own home ground. This was absolutely no good feeling at all. They were just about to start talking about this, and that's so that they could pull their attention from Ben, when Jack suddenly stood up. They were quite surprised at first, but they thought that he wanted to see how the first dance was going to be performed. In the end, Jack did something that they were not expecting. After standing up, without saying a single word, he strode towards the dance floor. Anderson and the others were immediately flustered. They were present when Ben had insulted him. And not just him, but all of them. In their minds right now, they thought that Jack was going to compete with Ben to get the first dance of the banquet. Jack, it is better if you don't go. You can simply go after the first dance is over. William immediately tried to persuade him to stay. It is just a first dance. There's no need to get flustered at this moment and suffer worse consequences at the end of it all. Even Kelly could not hold it anymore and tried to persuade him not to go. During the chats that they had been having, they found that although Jack was quite cold, he wasn't someone who put on airs of a superior. In fact, he was an easygoing person. It was just that his face was not used to smiling. Thus, they hadn't seen his smile yet. Jack completely ignored what they were trying to tell him and headed towards the dance floor. He had his own reasons for heading there instead of staying and being an audience to the first dance of the night. As he walked towards the dance floor, Ben felt that the world was his. After all, he knew a little about Celine's background. Although not by a large margin, at least he knew that. Not only was she beautiful, but she was capable in managing businesses. Although he was a playboy, that did not mean that he was an idiot. He was just enjoying his youth. But at the end of it all, he knew that the responsibility that he carried as the only heir of the Tawal family wasn't something small. He was the one that was supposed to lead their family to another level and not to make it drop by a level or two. So, when it came to issues concerning marriage, he had decided to find a capable and rich girl that could be married into his family. In this way, he would be able to improve the family condition and influence. After all, if his family and the girl's family had a good relationship, the connections that he would have gotten would help him in carrying out many business projects. The best candidate that he had found so far was Celine. Not only was she a beauty, but her family wasn't poor as well. In fact, the word poor wasn't supposed to be mentioned when talking about her or her family. Her capabilities could not be doubted when one looked at the present issue. She was the one that was starting a company. While he was in his thoughts, he arrived before the dance floor. He looked at the beautiful Celine and smiled. Although her face could not be seen clearly, he could still see her. As he smiled, he said, "Thank you, Miss Gravy, for accepting my request of the first dance." Even as he said these words, the smugness and arrogance within them could be easily detected. Celine frowned the moment that she had his words. She then looked at him as if she was looking at a fool. She then wondered to herself, what type of medicine did young Master Ben take on this day? Benson didn't see the change in expression on Celine's face. So, he continued rambling about this and that. It was only after a minute that he noticed that something was not right. He was not the only one, as all those that had attended the banquet were currently looking at Celine with confused gazes. According to what they knew, the dance should have already begun a minute ago, the moment that the chosen partner arrived on the dance floor. But now, a minute had already gone by, but Celine showed no movements at all. She was the hostess, so she had to point out who her partner was. So, although Ben guessed that he was the one, he didn't step on the dance floor without being pointed at. Just as they were about to question what was going on, Faith's voice echoed. And the words that were said were quite stunning. I am sorry, young Master Ben, but you are not the partner that has been selected for the first dance. Ben was stunned the moment that he heard these words. He was confused for a moment before looking directly into Celine's eyes and asked, Not me? Are you sure that you are not mistaken? After all, amongst the young generation that have attended today, I am the best of them all. Furthermore, I was the one that asked for this opportunity the last time that we met last week. Ben had folded his hands in front of his chest as he looked at Faith. If I am right, I do remember that young Miss had rejected your invitation previously. Faith said these words coldly. She knew that there must be a reason as to why Celine decided to participate in the first dance of the banquet. But the partner that she had chosen was obviously not Ben. If it was not for the fact that she was quite curious about him, she would definitely not participate in the dancing. After all, it was already enough face for her to be present on this particular day. She was from the Gravy family. It was a family that none of the ones present in Inchoate could compete with. If it is not me, then tell me, who is it that can compete with me? Ben asked as his face darkened. When he was coming towards the dance floor, he hadn't expected that he would be rejected before stepping onto the dance floor. Currently, his anger was already simmering. He wanted to know just who had the guts to compete with him. Celine's expression was currently cold. She looked behind Ben and said slowly, The one behind you. Vincent immediately turned around, ready to see who was so unique or special that he could attract the attention of the lady that he was chasing after. His movements immediately froze the moment that he met the cold and indifferent blue eyes. This was the second time that he was seeing these kind of eyes. The first time was obviously the moment that he had completely angered Jack. And now, as these eyes stared at him, he felt his body trembling a little. In Jack's presence, his usually arrogant expression was forced to disappear. Why are you here? After regaining his composure, Ben immediately asked aggressively. For a lifetime, he had never expected that the person that he was busy humiliating previously, the one that he had boasted to about being the hostess's partner, was actually the real partner. He was indeed angry. But as there were many eyes that were currently observing him, he dared not to threaten nor insult Jack. After all, if he did that, his already stained reputation would be soaked into the mud again. Of course, Jack had no obligation of replying to this question. So, he just passed by the side and stepped onto the dance floor. There, his blue eyes that were originally cold and indifferent immediately changed. All the coldness immediately disappeared, and what replaced it was complicated emotions. The two stared at each other for a moment of time and were only brought back to the present by the sound of music. Since the music had already begun, it was obvious that the dance had to begin as well. They each stepped closer to each other. Then, as Celine placed her hands around his neck, he wrapped his hands around her slim waist. And bit by bit, they began moving their bodies according to the flow of the music. Jack's actions were well within the vision of William and the group. As he approached the stage, they were filled with trepidation. They had thought that Jack was going mad at that moment. And the moment that he stopped behind Ben, they thought that Jack was going to make his move then. But in the end, the news that they received almost made their minds buzz. It was so mind-blowing. The person that had just been bragging about being the hostess's partner was rejected. It turned out that he had previously asked for the chance, but was turned down. But now, as they thought about this, they couldn't help but wonder what had given him the confidence to say that he was going to have the first dance in front of them. But all the same, they were quite pleased seeing the dark expression on his usually arrogant face. For the first time, they could see him losing. Furthermore, they were quite waiting for the race that would take place this night, where he would lose once again. But what they were wondering about was the fact that, how had Jack known that Ben would be rejected? That was the question that was in their mind at that moment. But in the next second, a bomb was detonated in their minds the moment that they heard Celine's words. The one behind you. The person that was standing behind Ben at that moment was obviously Jack. The others were quite a distance away from the dance floor. The group looked at each other with funny expressions. It was obvious that none of them believed what they were seeing. Ouch. Why did you pinch me? I wanted to confirm that I wasn't dreaming. Although it's only 8, I don't trust myself to be awake at this moment. Then, why not pinch yourself? I already said that I don't trust myself. Was Jack messing with us before? I don't know, but I think that's true. After all, he stood up and headed towards the dance floor without being called. I see now. That's the reason as to why he came without a partner. It turned that his partner was the organizer of the banquet. Yeah, no wonder he was staring at the door that led behind the stage previously during the meals. Did we just invite someone to his own banquet? Ha ha ha, this is a new record that we've made. By the way, they're quite a couple, right? Sure, they match each other. I like seeing Bin's current expression. By the way, that lady, I heard that she's from the Gravy family? You mean the one that's from the capital? I think so. After all, to be able to invite all these bigwigs here, she must have some kind of reputation. But I don't think that's true. After all, if she's a member of such a prestigious family, why would she need to start a small company in our small inchoate city? Yeah, you're right. As they talked, Jack and Celine had already began dancing with the other's arm around the other's body. Their moves were trained, showing that they had both learned about dancing, and they weren't noobs. Previously, Jack had looked into her eyes when she was looking at his direction. At first, he had thought that she was looking at Ben. In the end, even after Ben moved, he saw that the eyes were still looking at him. The moment that he saw the very same expression as he had seen 3 times before, he immediately understood that she wanted him to be her partner. Jack was also full of questions that he would like to ask her about. This was going to be a good chance for him to ask that question. After all, their meetings before had no exchange of words. Now, as he felt her arms around his neck, as well as the softness in his hands as he held her slim waist, Jack could still feel that there was quite a big difference. During his practice in dancing, he'd obviously held a girl the same way. But in the end, the feeling that he was getting right now was completely different. Jack was someone that did things to the perfection. When he was learning about dancing, he was around 6 years old. He had put in a lot of effort to learn. All of this was to impress his mother. In the end, when he was 15, he had stopped training as his mother had died. I can see that you didn't want to participate in this dance previously. Jack took the initiative to ask. Celine stared at him for a moment before she replied with a question of her own. How did you know? You stood at the door. The meal was just before the dance, about 10 minutes. But you appeared there. It was obvious that you didn't even want to show your face on the stage at all. Jack said all this as they continued moving according to the beats. You're quite perceptive, I see. Anyway, that was the truth. I didn't want to participate in this at all. But when I saw you, I had to participate. After all, I'm quite curious about you. Celine said as she followed his movements as he led the dance. After all, the 2 times that we've met in the same week, you always got to hold me. As you're the first man to hold me like that other than my father, I of course had to be curious about you. Celine continued. Jack was silent for a moment before saying, You're not the only one. After all, the moment that I see you, I can detect some sense of familiarity. I was wondering if I had ever met you before. Celine raised her brows at Jack's words. She could already tell that he was telling the truth from his current expression. But what had made her have that reaction was simply because she, too, had sensed some kind of familiarity from Jack. But no matter how much she tried to remember, she couldn't tell if they had ever met before. This was quite strange. But to think that they had met before and none of them could remember, wasn't that absurd? That was unless all their memories about the other were wiped out. And for that, it was impossible. Nobody had the ability to change or delete their memories about the other, right? What do you say that we have a simple chat after the dance? Jack asked. He wanted to know more about this girl, a girl that had made his nights sometimes sleepless and sometimes so sweet that he didn't want to wake up. Celine looked at him and smiled. That will depend on how you perform in this dance. As she smiled, Jack, who was standing right next to her, in front of her, her face close to his, he could see how beautiful that smile was. The 2 dimples immediately made her look like a different person. This was the first time that he was seeing her enchanting smile. Not knowing why, but it seemed that he had been affected by her smile as he returned the gesture. Unlike the previous shallow smiles, this was one that was full of his true thoughts at the moment. This smile was sincere. When Celine saw that smile etched on his face, she couldn't help but be dazed for a moment. That smile was indeed filled with a male's charm. Coupled with the handsome face, she thought that Jack was like a prince right from a painting. And because of this, her smile became even brighter. The spectating crowd was amazed by the 2. Not only were their dance moves well coordinated, as if they had practiced together before, but their moves completely matched the rhythm of the music. When Celine smiled, it was like a blooming flower. And then Jack's smile in return, it was like the cold moon giving a sense of warmth. The 2 smiles immediately attracted the appreciation of the spectators. Even Ben, who was watching the duo dance angrily, was forced to admit defeat. After all, the 2 smiles really complemented each other. But what he and the others were wondering about was, what are they talking about and that they're smiling like that? Even Faith was stunned by the smile that erupted from Celine's face. This was the first time that she'd seen that kind of carefree smile on her face. Even when facing her, who was like her sister, the smile was different from this. Even to her parents, it was always a smile that was different. In other words, this smile was quite unique. As for Jack, she didn't know why, but she nodded her head as she looked at him. But the show wasn't over at all. The reason for that being that the music had reached the part that would need fast movements. This was Celine's request to the one that was in charge of music. Back to the couple. "You ready to have a competition on this dance?" Jack asked with a smile. This was the smile that he had only shown to his mother. Ever since her death about 4 years ago, he had never shown it to another person. But now, he was showing it to a person that he didn't even know. Currently, it was as if all the people in the hall didn't exist at all. All that was there was the two of them, the music, and the dance floor. If there was a person that knew these two well was present, she would be completely stunned by this scene. Why was that? It was because Jack's smiles were rare and shallow. Although they were sincere, they were never that much enthusiastic. On the other hand, Celine's smiles were only seen by her parents, grandparents, and finally, Faith, who was like her sister. In front of her subordinates and strangers, she was like a beautiful sculpture made of ice. Her expression was always cold. No matter if she was praising someone or talking about punishment, her expression remained the same. The only thing that changed was her tone. But now, these two people, who always had no smiles on their faces or were rare to smile, were brightly smiling at each other. Without them noticing it, the ice in their hearts had began melting. With a competitive spirit and eyes that were filled with determination, Celine replied, "Let's do it then." Her words were like a signal as the tempo of the music immediately shot upwards, and so was the movement of the two. Their first competition immediately began. As for the results, that would have to wait till the song ended.